Hello there, Andrew Jackson lovers and haters. This is video historian Matthew Lasar. As promised, I'm here to explain what Creek and Cherokee Indians have to do with the battle over the second bank of the United States. This is part 2 of my video series on Andrew Jackson and populism. You see, in 1813 and 1814, Jackson led a United States Army division against the Creek Indians of Alabama and Georgia. The Creeks lost this war in part because they were divided between Creeks who wanted to cooperate with the USA and the so-called Red Stick Creeks who accurately saw what the USA had in store for them down the line, and they knew it wasn't good. Jackson enrolled the aid of the Cherokee Indians in this fight. Then when he won the famous Battle of Horseshoe Bend, he conquered an area around the size of Scotland. In the end, Jackson and several of his buddies took control of around 45,000 acres. They then set up a matrix of slave labor cotton plantations, just as cotton prices were reaching record highs following the end of the War of 1812. It looked like everything was on the up and up for Jackson, but there were problems. It should be noted as a series of background observations that Andrew Jackson was a violent and unstable man. He was born in 1767 to Scots-Irish parents of very modest circumstances. His father died when he was young, and he was a bit of a hero in the American Revolution. After the Revolution, he, like a lot of winners in that conflict, moved west of the Appalachians to the city of Nashville, where he became a sort of all-purpose hustler, a land speculator, a landowner, and a slave owner. And like a lot of such men, he found it useful and expedient to become a general for a state militia. But he also fought duels. Formal duels, one in which he shot and killed a man, and informal duels, such as his infamous 1813 gang battle with Thomas Hart Benton in a Nashville tavern, in which one of Jackson's buddies stabbed Benton 5 times, and Benton shot Jackson in the left arm shoulder area, leaving him soaked in blood and a bullet permanently implanted in his body. These melees impressed some people but put off many others. Jackson certainly acquired a bunch of land, but he didn't have a lot of money. In 1814, he wrote a letter that suggests that he wasn't sure if he even had $300 in the bank. That was probably a little less than $8,000 today, which is some money, but not much if you were an acquisitive, ambitious guy like Jackson. Then he got lucky. Following the Creek War, Jackson went on to win an enormous victory against the British in the Battle of New Orleans in 1815, which ironically was fought just after the USA and Britain made peace in the Treaty of Ghent. But the victory, following the British sacking and burning of Washington, D.C. earlier, made Jackson incredibly popular. Now Jackson returned to the Tennessee-Alabama area and, capitalizing on his fame, insisted that during the Creek War he had also conquered areas that included the fertile lands around Muscle Shoals on the Tennessee River, which flows to the Mississippi, which flows to New Orleans. But the problem was that a lot of that land was inhabited by Cherokee Indians who had helped Jackson fight the Creeks and the British. Jackson was like, no worries, I'll just go get my surveyor to classify that land as part of the areas captured in the Creek War, and he even gave him bodyguards for protection. But the Cherokee had influence in Washington, D.C. They had, after all, helped Jackson in the Battle of New Orleans, and one of their leaders, John Ross, who had fought in Jackson's army, complained to the War Department. Ross protested that it looked like Jackson was moving on their land, and the War Department told Jackson to stop with his moves on Muscle Shoals, where many Cherokee people lived. Jackson responded by furiously protesting to President James Madison and encouraging white settlers to squat on land in the area. And lots of pro-Jackson newspapers started going on about here's this big national hero who saved the country and all he wants is a little Indian land. By the way, the area was about a third of the size of New Jersey. So the Madison administration backed down and said, look, you didn't really conquer that land in the Creek War, but you can talk to the Cherokees about them selling it to us and then you buying some of it. And the Cherokees could see the writing on the wall with all these white settlers showing up. They figured that they were going to lose that land and so they may as well get some cash for it. And so they took $65,000 from the federal government for the south bank of the Tennessee River, and they even sold a bunch in the north bank. And the federal government put the land up for auction, and Jackson got in early and bought himself tons of land, town plots, a full square mile of farmland. Land prices skyrocketed from $2 an acre to almost $80 an acre. And very quickly, the East Coast slave states, Virginia, the Carolinas, sold the chained children of their adult slaves to these new Deep South farmers, including Andrew Jackson, who owned slaves throughout his adult life. And I'm talking about this story because I think it's important in understanding Jackson's response to Nicholas Biddle's request that the Second Bank of the United States be rechartered in 1832, 4 years ahead of its expiration date in 1836. My take on this bank battle is that Jackson saw the Second Bank the way he saw the rest of the federal government, as a bunch of bureaucrats and fancy-suited guys with silver spoons in their mouths who threw roadblocks into his efforts to make a fortune following the Creek War and the Battle of New Orleans. Now, there were legitimate things to discuss about the Second Bank, whether any government agency like the Second Bank should have so much power over local and regional banks. But opponents of the bank often focused on Biddle, who was, in the words of one historian, a, quote, snobbish, aristocratic Philadelphian. During an 1832 government hearing, Biddle boasted that his agency had the power to destroy, that's a quote, destroy any state or local bank. Second Bank haters seized on this. They started calling the Second Bank Biddle's Bank, a nice anti-elitist alliteration for the popular newspapers to devour. Jackson turned the debate into a battle over his personal future. "The bank is trying to destroy me," he told his vice president, "but I will kill it." It was Jackson versus Biddle. That's how the debate played out with the public. Andrew Jackson was the first president to deploy veto power as a big political weapon and to appeal to the public to help him defeat his opponents in Congress. Now, the destruction of the Second Bank became a great populist victory for the common man, the ordinary, hard-working hustler just trying to make a buck, being blocked by the elites who played favorites with their own class to the exclusion of everybody else. But now that the Second Bank was vetoed, what would take its place? I will focus on that in my third video on this subject.